Welcome everyone to GLR Week 2023. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I am excited to be the webinar producer for our session today. Before we get started, I want to encourage all of you to connect and engage with us on social media. On Twitter, follow us at Reading by Third, and on Facebook and LinkedIn, like the pages Campaign for GLR. Please use the hashtag GLR Week and hashtag Bright Spots Silver Linings to share any thoughts you may have from the webinar. I'd also like to share some housekeeping tips before we get started. First, we'd love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure when responding to select both panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. The webinar is being recorded and live streamed on our Facebook page. A link to the recording, as well as any resources, slides, and panelist bios, will be sent in a follow-up email to all who registered for the session. Lastly, we'll be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during closing and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. Again, it's my honor to welcome you to GLR Week 2023 with the theme of Bright Spots and Silver Linings. This is our fourth session this week, but we have many more. Later this week, tomorrow, we will have a double header. First, with a conversation with the Institute of Education Sciences at 12:30 Eastern Time, followed by a session on AI-enhanced efficacy. On Thursday, we'll have two sessions, first on bright spots and groundwork, what's working in communities, followed by a session on global perspectives on post-pandemic academic recovery. Registration and information for those sessions will be posted in the chat box now, and we hope you can join us. We also encourage you to join as many state events as you can. Multiple states across the US are holding events or sponsoring different themes that are highlighted on a special state event website. That link will be posted in the chat box, and we encourage you to take a look and join as many as you can. And joining you now is Sarah Torian, Chief Learning and Engagement Officer with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Sierra, and welcome everyone. We are so glad that you could all join us to be a part of GLR Week 2023, and especially this conversation about the soon-to-be released documentary film, The Right to Read, featuring the voices and stories of families, educators, education leaders, and journalists. This film lifts up literacy as the greatest civil rights issue of our time. And the Campaign for Grade Level Reading has been honored to partner with the filmmakers to share pre-release access of this film with our network. And I hope that many of you have had a chance to watch it already. I do know that the demand for this film was so incredibly high that we hit our maximum number, I think, within the first 24 hours after it was opened up. So we've reached out to the filmmakers. We've gotten them to exceed those numbers. So if you had any issues logging on before, please go back and try again because it's an incredible film and we really want as many people as possible to see it. So today's conversation, we've got a great set of panelists who have joined us to share their thoughts and their insights on the film. And it is my honor to welcome and introduce them right now. First, welcome to David Banks. David serves as chancellor of the New York City Department of Education, the largest school system in the nation, where he applies his vision of an education system that emphasizes partnerships between schools and communities. Welcome also to my friend and colleague, Yoli Flores. Yoli serves as president and CEO of Families in Schools, a statewide nonprofit organization based in California that works to involve families and communities in their children's education to achieve lifelong success. Previously, Yoli supported the Campaign for Grade Level Reading in elevating parent success as a critical part of our work. She also served on the school board of the Los Angeles Unified School District, where she's bringing lots of hats and lots of different perspectives to the conversation today. And the Hunter family is another exciting addition that we have to today's conversation. We've got Father Isaiah, Mother Teresa, and daughter Ivy. They were all featured in the film, highlighting Isaiah and Teresa's efforts to promote Ivy's early language and literacy development and engage her with language and letters from her earliest years. Their efforts have successfully prepared her to enter first grade this coming fall and enjoy a lifelong love of reading. So we're decided all three of these movie stars could join us for today's conversation. Welcome also to Nicholas Philman. Nick serves as the K-5 English and Language Arts Coordinator for Marietta City Schools in Metro Atlanta, Georgia, where he oversees instruction, professional development, and resources for all things literacy in the district's elementary schools. For the past 3 years, that work has included leading systematic and systemic changes to align the science of reading in partnership with the Atlanta Speech School. Welcome also to Vincent Staley. Vince serves as the Executive Director of Media Impact Funders, and he brings a deep expertise in using media to advance causes. And finally, I'm delighted to welcome and introduce Ryan Lee James. Ryan serves as the Chief Academic Officer and the Director of the Rollins Center for Language and Literacy at the Atlanta Speech School, where she leads the development and advancement of Cox Campus, a free, equity-based online professional learning community. Ryan also oversees and designs the implementation and evaluation of large-scale community-based projects aimed at improving language and literacy outcomes for children. And she will moderate today's conversation. Thank you all for joining us, and I'll pass the mic over to you now, Ryan.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you, Sarah, for the warm introduction. And I'm extremely delighted to be here. And unfortunately, I can't see all of the many faces, but really excited to read the chat and see where many of you are coming from. I see some folks from all over the country, some of whom I'm familiar with. So welcome to this discussion. We're going to do the best that we can to really allow each panelist to tell their story individually, their role in advancing literacy in our country. And then at the end, we are going to have all of our panelists come off camera to engage in some integrated discussion. Along the way, we will try to respond to questions that are in the Q&A box as we go. I'll keep a close eye on that. And I have my colleagues, Sarah and others who will be watching the Q&A box. But at the very end, we will have some designated time to really dig into Q&A. So please go ahead, put your thoughts in the chat, but use the Q&A box if you have a very specific question that you want answered by the panel. So now we're going to dig in. So I'm going to ask the Hunter family to come off camera. And we are just going to start with the Hunter family and providing them an opportunity to share their story. Now, I want y'all to stay focused. Ivy can certainly steal the show here. And we could give her her own little segment for about 20 to 30 minutes and she could keep us entertained. But try to hear what mom and dad have to say because they have a really important story to tell. So I want to welcome Ivy, who is certainly the star of today. Hello, Ivy. We
Hello,
love
everyone.
to see that beautiful
Hi.
smile. Hey. So I'm going to just kick it off to the Hunter family and sort of ask y'all an open-ended question. So really the goal here is for, at least in this segment, for the Hunter family to be able to share their story. But I want to start y'all off with asking, why was it important for you to be a part of this film?
First, I want to say thank you for inviting us and having us
Absolutely.
on, okay, as one of the families in the film. All right, so we got started with Healthy Families, and that is a program here in the city of Virginia Beach, Virginia. And what they do is they help families when they first become pregnant to sort of get used to, you know, having a little one in the home. So they will come out and they will talk to us and just check up on us, make sure we have like all the needs that we needed for her, you know, as first-time parents. And what they did was they introduced us to a program called Lena Start. And Lena Start is to help parents with babies age 0 to 3 to help increase their brain development So we were like, okay, yes, let's join. And she was like, well, it just got started. It's the first one here in Virginia. Do y'all want to be a part of it? And we're like, yeah, we want to be a part of it, but we didn't know if it was going to be like, for only African Americans or if it was going to be all races. We didn't want to be a statistic, walking into this classroom like, oh my God, they're just trying to, pinpoint us out. And so when we get in the class, we see everybody in there. It's a mixture, very cultural setting inside the classroom. And I love the class because they fed us, right? That was my thing. They gave us food, gave us dinner, right? And then Isaiah, he's the one who looks up everything, makes sure we're doing the best for our family. So he done did the research and everything on the Lena program. I loved it so much that I started teaching it. And so our story was so unique. Ivy was 2 months when we started. She was 5 months when we graduated. And our story was very unique. And I wanted to give back to the community. So I asked if I can be the very first parent teacher in the program. And I've been teaching the program for 5 years. So since she was born, I've been teaching.
Wow. Okay, so I guess even in our earlier communications, I did not realize that you mentioned healthy families.
Yes.
So that's like a community-based sort of organization that
Organization here.
okay,
Yes.
that supports families in their first child, with their first child.
With their first child. So they start 2 weeks before your child is born.
Wow.
Mhm.
Wow. So that is so interesting. And I think that, as we go throughout this conversation, I certainly want to come back to the importance of community organizations like that. And what you're touching on is something that we know just to be a scientific fact, that
Yes.
the brain starts to develop, babies are hearing sound, or fetuses are hearing sounds in utero before they're even born. And so all of this development, a lot of development is happening in the third trimester of pregnancy.
Yes.
And so it sounds like this Healthy Families program really capitalizes and tries to build capacity in families. So tell us a little more about how your work. So you mentioned that now you were one of the first Lena trainers as a parent graduate. Tell us how else you are really wrapping your arms around the community. Um, and tell us about how your advocacy and support of Ivy really led you to be able to now support the broader community.
Just by being a parent.
Mm.
Right? Getting out there, meeting other parents, going to community events, talking about the program, talking about how the program has helped me and our family, right? Ivy, I said Lena. Ivy is definitely a Lena baby, right? Right from the start, talking, we're working with her, alphabets, ABCs, all of that, like introducing it to her while she was younger. And then I'm just teaching that to other parents. I'm teaching them how to do that, right? It's many different ways, but I'm just teaching them the simplest way is do what you can do for your family, the way it works for you. Don't try to copy no one else. Our story is unique, and that's how Jenny McKenzie, that's how she found us. She found us through Lena.org. She found the organization. They gave her our name under Growth Smart at Virginia Beach. And that's how she found us. And she's been with us ever since. We love it. It was definitely different having a documentary crew in your home, in your business all day, every day. And they tell you to act normal, but there's no way you can act normal, right? When people are with the camera, like right in your face, right? Following your every move. There's nothing normal about that.
Well, I would say y'all did a pretty good job. Y'all did a pretty good job of acting normal. I want to ask okay, so I'm glad that Teresa, that you're really touching on the importance of the role of the family. So I have 2 more questions for y'all. But I want to ask about Isaiah. And so often we notice that caregiver training programs and early intervention programs often sort of target the mom. So I want to know how Isaiah has been jumping in to support Ivy. And we certainly saw a little bit of it in the film, but really want to hear from you too, Isaiah, about how you've been able to support your wife and Ivy.
Well, Well, yeah, it's definitely been a fun journey for sure. Especially the documentary, and you know how one thing led to another, and now we're here. So, but as far as just it all started with just wanting the best for our daughter. Um, and just figuring out what we had to do, what we had to learn to make that happen. I did spend some time in the school system here in Virginia Beach. So I did have some exposure to working with middle school age children and high school age children. And I was exposed to things that, like, ideal situations that I would love to set Ivy up for. And I was also exposed to some situations that I would definitely would do all I can to have Ivy avoid those situations. So just trying to learn how to be the best parents we could be, um, and setting her up with the reading and speaking. And of course, one of the things I learned when working with children is that the better they read, the better they speak, the clearer they think, the better they write, the better they express themselves emotionally. And I know I did work with some behavioral challenged kids as well. And one of the things I noticed is that a lot of the children who had behavioral issues, they weren't the best readers and writers. So it could possibly boil down to not being able to express themselves effectively. So I just wanted to like I said, that's just a theory of mine, but I feel like her learning how to read and write and speak effectively will eventually lead her to be able to express herself effectively and express her emotions and be able to regulate emotions and all that stuff. So it all starts with just learning how to, properly read, and then the domino effect of her being a well-rounded individual when she grows up.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm so glad you're touching on so much. And I'm really glad you are, because in a second, we're going to transition to Chancellor Banks. And I know that there's a lot of exciting work happening in New York City DOE around supporting children, families, and teachers. And what you're touching on, Isaiah, is a fact that children who demonstrate early difficulty with communication their behavior becomes their communication. And we also know, as it was highlighted in the film, that maybe the most recent statistic is 2/3, don't quote me, I can't remember exactly, but that 2/3 or about that of inmates actually are struggling readers. And so we certainly see this connection between access to literacy and being able to live a life of self-determination. So I'm really glad you touched on that, because what's happening in New York City DOE, and Nick is going to talk to us about what's happening here in Metro Atlanta, is very much because of what you highlight. That we know if we can work with children early and build the skills. I mean, in the video I was watching earlier with y'all talking and engaging with Ivy, I think you were doing her hair and she was like counting the people in a book. She was in tune, and that was a child-led conversation. You were sort of following her lead, but we can see early on that little ones are hungry for that early language and communication and support. Okay, I know we have to transition to Chancellor Banks, but I have two more questions. One question is for Ivy. Ivy, should I ask you your question first, or do you want me to ask mommy and daddy this question? You first? Okay, so Ivy is headed to first grade. And we want to know, Ivy, what are you looking forward to for first grade?
Learning science. Learning science.
Oh, science. Okay, so science is your favorite subject, right? What do you like about science?
Well, I like learning new things of science.
Wow.
Like turning an egg into a gold different color. And when you push it too hard, it Pops.
So you love learning about scientific concepts, right? You love learning about all things science. Well, we wish you the best, Ivy, as you head to first grade. You were a superstar in the film.
Thank
You
you.
stole the show. And I know people are watching it just because you're in it. You're like a movie star.
She's definitely our future scientist. She loves making me mud pies when we're out doing the yard work. She has the most amazing rock collection, and it's growing every day. So she's definitely our little science girl for sure.
Wow. Well, Ivy, we wish you and mommy and daddy all the best. Before I let y'all go off or go away for just a few minutes, I want to ask mommy and daddy, what is the greatest barrier that you think is facing families today?
For me, it's not knowing what's out there. Right? Because it's a lot of parent courses, parent and caregiver activities and things like that. But if parents don't know it's there, if we're not putting it in their face, then they're not going to be able to find it. So putting things like that in their face, like our Lena program, putting that in their face, putting BB Reads, which is one of the programs that we have, letting parents know that we have these resources for you. We just got to, first of all, meet them where they are, right? So we go to the places that they are to give them the information, because a lot of parents, they don't know. So either we put it in television, we put it on media, because that's where we are now, right? Or we go to where they are. I know that's a challenge for a lot of parents. They just don't know, where to get the information from, or where they can get help from too. Because a lot of times it's just, getting a little bit of help to help you along, your journey with your child. So I know that's a big one for me.
Absolutely.
And I definitely second that with her. Teresa is the Virginia Beach connection. She is the plug. I'm telling you, when people need to know what's going on, like all of our friends, whatnot, Teresa's always introducing people to, some sort of resource. And like, oh, you didn't know they have that in Virginia Beach? Yeah, come on, let me show you how to sign up. And she's definitely a very resourceful person and leads people to resources. Which is amazing. But one of the other things that I think is a barrier per se is just knowing that, or realizing that parents have to be involved, and that you can be involved. You can ask questions to to teachers and to school board and whatnot. So this is the day that we can't just send our kids off to school and just assume that they're being taught effectively. So so we really have, so not only are we enabled to do that, but we it's our responsibility to make sure that our children are being taught the right things in school.
That's right.
And that we do have the power to ask. Like I know we actually just had an experience this year where I had some questions about our Ivy's teachers, her training, I guess, her background. But for some reason, I just kind of felt like I wasn't really, supposed to be able to just ask that, But after this film came out toward the end of the school year, I'm like, man, I had every right to ask, So
yes.
So this film is definitely an eye opener to let us know that we are empowered to ask about what our children are learning, and make sure that they are doing the right thing.
So Isaiah, you touched on, and now we're going to transition, and Sarah is going to play the trailer for us, but I just want to touch on a couple of things because this will be important for when Chancellor Banks comes on. You touched on a couple of important things. You mentioned when you started speaking the first time around that all parents want what's best for their kids. And we do know that that is just a universal fundamental truth. You can talk to parents from varying backgrounds, different socioeconomic status, different race, language, culture. Everybody wants what's best for their kids. And then Teresa, you touched on this, being able to bring awareness to the things that already exist. And so a lot of times parents just don't know. They don't know of all the tools and access that they have at their fingertips. And so we see when parents do know, they usually take advantage of those resources. And so we certainly want to watch this trailer and then hear from Chancellor Banks about what they're doing in New York City DOE, certainly leading the nation in many ways on this front and how they're engaging families. So thank you to the Hunter family. Please don't go far because we look forward to bringing y'all back at the end for some conversation. So Sarah and the Campaign for Grade Level Reading team, I'll hand it over to y'all to show the trailer.
Millions of American kids struggle to read.
We should succeed in seeing that every 8-year-old can read independently.
When I first started teaching in Oakland, there were only 2 kids in my class of 35 who could read.
Larry went to the cat.
My man Larry, I'm gonna say this right now on tape. My man Larry just read his first sentence by himself, and I'm very, very proud of him.
We have a lot of people who struggle to read. Why aren't we screaming and yelling about this?
In 35 years, we have gone backwards, not forwards.
It is a national problem that cuts across demographics, but it's painted as a minority issue.
For as long as I can ever remember, I've wanted to be a teacher.
This school is the lowest performing in reading in the district.
So this is a civil rights issue. We're really trying to figure out how to get Oakland kids to read.
Reading is everything. That's the foundation to everything in this life.
It has been said that illiteracy is one of the most solvable issues of our time.
What letter is it?
Why?
Yeah.
Everybody deserves the right to read. Literacy is for all.
We want to make sure that all students have the opportunity to be with a teacher who has learned the science of reading in order to crack the code of reading.
Question is today, do we have the political will and do we have the moral courage and fortitude to use literacy as a vehicle to include all? This is social justice.
Okay, thank y'all for showing that trailer. So now that we're back, I would like to introduce again Mr. David Banks, who serves currently as the Chancellor for New York City Department of Education. Welcome, Chancellor Banks.
Here I am.
Hello, how are you?
Listen, I'm doing great, feeling great, very happy to be here with you, and thank you for moderating, and thank Joy Moore for inviting me to be with all of you today. Really excited about it.
Well, thank you, Chancellor Banks. And I just want to say that I have been honored to serve on the New York City DOE Literacy Advisory Council over the last year or so. And I'm grateful for the work that New York City is doing. And though I transitioned from New York a while ago and live in Atlanta, it is an honor to be able to serve in that way, especially because I get like first glimpse into all the very exciting things that New York City DOE is doing. And so I just want to start you off and ask you a question, and then eventually sort of tie back into some of what the Hunter family was talking about as it relates to work with families, but wanted just to provide you the opportunity to talk about how New York City DOE is renewing its commitment to literacy.
First of all, thank you so much for your time with us on our Literacy Advisory Council. Really appreciate it, and all that you're doing. I've been an educator for many years, having been a teacher, an assistant principal, a principal. But I remember my early years as a teacher, teaching 4th and 5th grade, and seeing so many young people that would show up in the 4th and 5th grade, and they were already 2 grades below grade level, and wondering, how did that happen? But I think over the last 20, 25 years, we got away from kind of what we knew that really did work if we did it well. And that was at its core, using that that phonetic approach to the teaching of reading. Reading really involves more than phonics, right? It's phonemic awareness, vocabulary, fluency, comprehension. But without the phonics as a basic core block, it's like building a house starting at the second floor. And for the last 20, 25 years, not only in New York City, but all around the country, we got away from that. And I will tell you, in New York City, we only have 51% of our students in New York do not read on grade level. 64% of Black and brown kids don't read on grade level. It was, first of all, recognizing that and just how unacceptable that is. It marked a real call to action, certainly for me as a school chancellor. We were already doing work around dyslexia and screenings and interventions for young people with dyslexia. But this broader notion that, quite frankly, the kids can't read is something that we have thrown ourselves into. It is the most important issue that we are dealing with right now. So what we have done as a response, we recognize that this is an issue even all the way from birth. So in all of our pre-K work, our 3K work, all of that early childhood space, we have decided to work with one specific curriculum, the creative curriculum, and every one of our teachers across all of our pre-K centers throughout New York City are going to be working, and they're all being trained as we speak in a very solid, very focused approach to how we're going to address this and ensure that we're getting our kids on level even at the earliest ages. Now, we have a 2-year rollout of this with the rest of our schools. We've essentially taken half of the New York City school system, and we've said to all of those schools that are working within a district, the district itself has to choose one specific curricula out of 3 that we've offered up as research-backed, that we feel really are deeply engaged in the science of reading, and it has all the elements that we think are essential. And so we offered up any one of those 3, and we said to the district, engage your parents, engage your families, engage your principals, and together we want the district to make a singular choice. The days of allowing our schools, everybody to just do whatever they think works best, has not gotten us the level of success that we need. And so we're going to be much more prescriptive in how we do this. The second set of schools will roll out the following September. So over the next 2 years, every one of our schools will have a singular curricular choice that they've made. But we do think that the magic and how we're going to turn this around is going to come through the level of professional development, the ongoing professional development. This is not drive-by PD. This is real intensive, ongoing stuff, job embedded. We've got the great benefit of working very closely with our union, the largest union in the country, the UFT. They are on board 1,000%. So they are real partners with us in this work as well. So we're excited about it, Ryan. We really are. We think we're off to a great start. There's a tremendous buzz that has been created all around the city. We've met with our colleagues in Mississippi and Tennessee, who have already been out the gate on this work for the last few years, but never in a place as large as New York City, but to be able to do this work. So, but we're learning from others who've already done some of this, and we're really excited. This is our big thing.
It's huge, Chancellor. And, you know, one thing that stands out in what you said or earlier on in your discussion about phonics, and we sort of think about phonics. So I'm a speech therapist by original training, and then later came to the field of reading. But we think about phonics as really being access, right? Like having a clear understanding the rules of phonics, the orthographic rules of English really helps you access text on a page. And so really what I appreciate about the work that is happening in New York City, though we're talking about phonics and we're talking about oral language and this critical access, there is also, at least in what I have seen from the outside and being engaged in the task force, is a focus on cultural responsiveness as well. and including other stakeholders. So you mentioned sort of taking a look at other states. You mentioned the union. And I know, again, from the task force work that y'all are intentionally engaging families as well as students. So can you talk to us a little bit about the critical stakeholders in this work that will support the success for students?
Yeah, and you've got to know that at a place like New York, right? I mean, the stakeholders are wide and varied and have great interests here. And the politics of education in New York City is serious business. And so it's as broad as our college and universities partners, from Harvard to NYU to Brooklyn College and CUNY, where most of our teachers actually come from, to a wide range of not-for-profit organizations who have been deeply invested in this work. No group bigger than Advocates for Children, who've been deeply moved and provided a lot of research and support for us in this space. Education Trusts. There's a wide range of groups. But our parents and our families that we've been engaging throughout this process very locally, through our superintendents and through the principals at our schools, are all engaged in this process. This is the kind of way, this is not an initiative for us. This is going to be a new way of life in which we're going to ensure that all of our kids are going to be on grade level. You cannot do that with our parents as your partners. When I came in as chancellor, I had 4 pillars, and one of those pillars was engaging families as true partners, not just as a slogan that goes up on the wall that you can find in almost any school in America, but to really say, we don't make big decisions without our families being at the table to help to drive that. Now, what's interesting about that is, not every family agrees with each other either, right? But it's being able to make the space that says to parents, we love you, we value you, we respect you, and we need you to be at the table and helping to shape this. Not we develop it, we figure it out, we think we're smarter than everybody, and then we tell the parents, this is what we're doing. No, parents have played a major role in helping us to co-create all of this. And in many ways, it's been so many of the parents and the families who have said to us from the very beginning, I'm distraught because my child can't read. And many of the parents thought it was something wrong with their child. They thought maybe it was something wrong with them and how they were working with their kids. But what we've come to realize, it is certainly this conundrum that we have found ourselves in is not the fault of our parents. It's certainly not the fault of our kids. But watch this, it's not even been the fault of our educators. I believe we have given them a flawed playbook. And we're giving them the right playbook. I use a sports analogy sometimes, right? If you keep running the same, you don't gain any yards. It's time to call a new play. We are calling a new play in New York City. And we're very, very hopeful that it's going to make a tremendous difference for all of our kids.
Well, absolutely. And so what you mentioned, and I know we're going to keep the conversation rolling, but I'm excited to hear what you're saying about families, because in preparation for this, what I was saying to Joy was one of the things and I was at the meeting that was in like May or something in person, one of the meetings. And what I was really excited about was what I mentioned to Joy was the humility, but also confidence of the New York City DOE leadership. Because around the country, as we've been talking about reading reform, I've heard a lot of conversations and been a part of them where leadership is sort of shying away from or not willing to acknowledge the role that we have all played as leaders and educators. But at the same time saying, you know what, we're going to engage families. We want our families to trust us. And we're moving forward with confidence in what research tells us works best for all kids. And so thank you so much, Chancellor Banks. I do have one other question for you. And it's really related to, I guess, sort of, you mentioned access, recognition, as well as raising awareness. And I know that it is tough for educators and superintendents and school leaders to make this sort of shift to different curricula, different resources that they're not, that may be new to them in many instances. How are y'all sort of bridging the relationship or establishing the relationship to make this transition a bit more digestible?
First of all, that's the work, right? So we've got to lean into this work. This is not going to be easy. It is a culture shift. People have been used to doing things a certain way. But let me say this, because I think I am most hopeful about all this because our educators are very excited about it. And the reason for it is because I don't run into as many people who say to me, well, we've been doing it this way and we don't want to change. That's not what I have experienced. And my superintendents are sharing. They are excited all across the city. You know why? Because we've not been getting the results that we need and we deserve and that our kids deserve. And our teachers are smart, they're hardworking, they love kids. And many of them have been at their wits' end saying, what are we doing wrong? I'm pouring into this everything that I have and it's not working. And so therefore we have the public, we've had a broken trust with the public because many of them have looked at traditional public schools and said, I can't send my child to a traditional public school because they're not going to even learn how to read. That's a broken trust. That's the essential component of why public schools were put in place in the first place. And so we have to ensure this level of literacy for all of our parents and our communities, but it starts with these educators who want to get this right. And I think that they have almost exhaled, Ryan, when we've said, it's not been your fault. We gave you the wrong playbook. We're going to give you a new playbook and we're going to run the play that's ultimately going to get us to the touchdown. And I think there's a sense from everybody that, finally, we're going to run a different play and we got a better chance at being successful. That's what I'm getting. There's not a lot of pushback. So it's no small thing when I tell you that the UFT has backed this 1,000%, not just backed it with rhetoric, with their people. They are part of our trainings in all of this. So ultimately, we're looking for everybody to win. The school system, the union, the teachers, but most importantly, our kids and their families. And we believe that we can do that if we are all working together. So we've sold it. We've got people fired up about it. They've been able to see that this is not just a New York City problem. This is happening all across the nation. I believe in the power and the promise and the talent of all young people, the same way as watching young Ivy on the Zoom just a little bit earlier. She's brilliant. You can see it, the energy, the talent, it's bursting at the seams. So all of our kids have that in one way, shape, or form. They all do. They need us as adults to provide the right framework so that that brilliance can be demonstrated. I'm fully committed as chancellor. Our mayor in New York City, Eric Adams, is behind it 1,000%. We're going to get the entire New York City community, not just educators, everybody, business leaders, not-for-profit leaders, everybody's going to be talking about reading. Everybody's going to buy in. This is going to be the North Star.
Well, thank you so much, Chancellor Banks. And so y'all heard it here. Chancellor Banks is changing the narrative. And I so appreciate you saying what you're saying about teachers, that teachers are committed. Our teachers haven't been given the playbook. Many of y'all, if you're in this world, you've seen the study that the National Center on Teaching Quality released a while back that pretty much demonstrates that only about 25% of our colleges and universities nationally are giving teachers what they need in terms of early literacy preparation. And so Chancellor Banks, thank you so much. We hope that you stick around because at the end of this, in an hour and a half or half an hour, sorry, not hour and a half an hour or so, we're going to have a sort of open dialogue amongst the panelists.
I will be here in a half hour from now. An hour and a half, that's
yeah. No. I won't be here in an hour and a half.
Thank you. I'll be back.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Chancellor Banks. So we are bringing a dear colleague on now, Dr. Nick Philman, who is again a dear friend and colleague of mine here in Metro Atlanta. And so it is so appropriate that we would follow up Chancellor Banks and his really clear call to action. There are so many tweetable, and I don't know if we're still using Twitter. I know there's a new platform, Threads. So many threadable comments from Chancellor Banks around the commitment of all teachers, as Goldie Muhammad talks about, the genius of all children that need to be cultivated. Chancellor Banks is talking about a full citywide ecosystem, expanding and extending beyond just teachers and school leaders, but into the community. Ivy's family talked with us about that. I'm sorry, Hunter family. Y'all are now known as Ivy's family. But so far, the theme is really that it takes a village. And we know that there's our mayor here in Atlanta, when he speaks, he talks about an African greeting that essentially says, "Are the children well?" And that we know how well we're doing as a nation and as a country when we can say that all of our children are well, not our children who don't receive free and reduced price lunch, not our children who are not, native English speakers, when we can say, yes, indeed, all of our children are well. And so delighted that Dr. Nick Philman is here again after Chancellor Banks to really talk with us a little bit about how some of this work is taking shape and shaping up in City of Marietta schools. So welcome, Nick. Glad you are here with us.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
So I'm just going to kick it off with so Chancellor Banks talked about teacher training and preparation, ongoing rigorous professional learning as being central to the success for children in New York City DOE and ultimately families. Can you talk with us about what the City of Marietta is doing to ensure that the teachers in your district, in your schools that are serving kids are prepared?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I am so happy that right as I was logging on, I got to hear Mr. Banks talk about teachers asking, what am I doing wrong? Like, I know I'm teaching well. I know I'm a good teacher. Why is this not working? And I have gotten to live that process all the way through, from being a homeroom teacher to an instructional coach to now a district level leader. Part of what I feel like our first step in Marietta was owning the things that we were doing wrong first. I personally can speak to having been a really, really successful instructional coach in a building in the period of balanced literacy. So I taught teachers how to use units of study. I got grade level teachers to be really, really good at Jan Richardson and the guided reading process, doing the things that we thought were the things that we were supposed to be doing. And the tricky part was that it worked for a pocket of kids, but there was always this, to be honest, much larger pocket that it just was not working for. And we were always reaching out, trying to find the reasons why the things that should have been working were not working. Thankfully, we have now entered into the era of structured literacy based on the science of reading. Our partnership with the Rollins Center at the Speech School has been hugely instrumental in reframing not only our instructional practices, but really turning teachers into scholars of learning, not just practitioners of learning, in learning how the brain works in order to learn how to read. I personally have a very strong literacy background and had never been introduced to the level of knowledge that I have in the past 3 years. It has been unreal. So our first step was owning the things that we were doing wrong and de-implementing some pieces while implementing other replacement practices and replacement resources. Some of those were easy. I'm gonna take that word back. None of this work has been like easy and seamless. Some of them were very visible changes just from one resource to another resource. So instead of leveled and predictable text, we're going to replace those with decodable text. But anyone who has worked in a classroom knows that just changing the resource without the knowledge behind how to use that resource is not going to get you the effect that we're looking for. So we have made a very purposeful trajectory in Marietta City of having the knowledge of the instructional shifts predate the introduction of new resources that go along with that shift. So understanding speech to print before we move to decodable text, understanding knowledge building integrated reading comprehension instruction before shifting to a new tier 1 core reading program. That way teachers go into it really, really understanding what it is that they're supposed to do with the things that they are supposed to be using.
Nick, there's so much rich information that you're sharing. I want you to share whatever it is you want to share. But I also want you to share a little bit more about what you're talking about around tier 1, because I'm trying to just draw the through line from what Chancellor Banks was talking about. So they've made some major shifts in New York City DOE, starting with changes in their core reading program, reading curricula. And so I know that things are, maybe a little different in Marietta City, but if you could just talk about the importance of solid tier 1 instruction. I've been watching the chat. I've seen that some folks are, asking some questions about dyslexia and how is all this integrated. But if you could talk with us about what the shifts have been in teacher training and curriculum in Marietta and how we're seeing that pay off in student outcomes would be great.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we kind of have 3 buckets. We had a solid phonics program before. Well, we had an existing in place phonics program before that we had to make tweaks to. So in places where we had existing resources, we either de-implemented and implemented something else, or we made tweaks to our resources in order to align better with the science of reading, which has meant leaning really heavily on our teacher leaders inside of our district to recraft some of those curriculum resources so that they are more effective in that tier 1 space. Also, really wrapping our heads around the fact that small group instruction is still tier 1 instruction. It's just targeted tier 1 instruction. We have done a lot of training around the difference in tier 1 small group versus intervention. Like not every student needs intervention, but every student would benefit from that really targeted phonics small group instruction. We actually revamped our entire assessment approach inside of Marietta City. Before, we really relied on 2 pieces, MAP, which was a universal screener for comprehension, and FMP, which was, of course, guided reading levels, right? We completely did away with the FMP guided reading levels and moved to a suite of assessments that really get down to the 5 pillars from the reading panel. So we do specific assessments on phonological awareness, decoding, encoding, and fluency, so that we can really target even our tier 1 instruction to exactly what every student needs. We are in a unique position when it comes to tier 1 core reading programs because Marietta did not have one before. It had always been school autonomy for every school to choose a reading program or approach that made the most sense for them. We know that a consistent approach makes more sense. However, we have been very cautious in wanting to be sure that we fully understand the needs and the demands of a core reading program before we adopt one. We are really lucky in Georgia that our vetting process for curriculum resources with that core reading program has aligned with new legislation in Georgia that is going to provide the entire state with new and more specific guidance on adopting core reading programs that align with the science.
Thank you so much for saying that, Nick. This is so good. And I know y'all will have probably more questions for Nick and what he and his team in Marietta City are doing. I want to just ask you a final question about how we've seen it translate to closing gaps in student achievement.
Yes.
But before answer that, and then I'll wrap us up.
Okay, so 2 big pieces, just kind of broad picture data shifts that we've seen. Number 1 happened right out of the gate. I told you that we revamped our assessment protocols. The assessments that really did target small grain growth across those individual skills, number 1 saw immediate impact. And the piece that we saw most quickly was the closing of gaps between our special education and general education populations our Black and white populations. The only exception that we have not seen closing as quickly is our students who are enrolled in ESOL services. The movement is there, but it's just not closing as quickly as other populations, which was really a nice learning, honestly, a learning moment for us of the fact that all these great shifts in tier 1 are going to work for the vast majority of our students, but there is always going to be individual populations that need individual attention. So this has allowed us now to really target that the additional changes based on that data instead of based on assumptions, which I feel like is what we did in the past.
Thank you so much, Nick. I know we have to transition, but I hope we can hear more from you. Stay on with us as we come back at the end for discussion. So we're going to bring now Yoli Flores, and she's going to share a little bit with us. As Yoli comes on camera, I just want to highlight a couple things that Chancellor Banks and Dr. Philman noted. Two things that really stick out to me is that in New York City DOE, and as well as City of Marietta, we know similar efforts have happened around the country as a result of legislation in Colorado, in Mississippi, where we are no longer allowing individual school districts and schools to decide which curriculum they're going to, or just which programs they're going to use, because we do know that there is a science to teaching reading. And so, like all other aspects of public health, we don't lean on preference or personal opinion, that we really want to do what's rooted in the science. The other thing that I would like to highlight that Chancellor Banks and Nick were both discussing is the need to really focus on specific populations. And so Nick mentioned that the gaps with the English language learners population is not, that students' growth is not accelerating as quickly as we would like to see. And so that is certainly an area to dig in on. But when we're asking why structured literacy aligned to the science of reading, the reason is because it makes literacy more accessible to all kids. And so lots of learning and growing still happening, obviously, in Marietta. But thank you, Nick, for sharing. So welcome, Yoli. Many of y'all have seen Yoli on these webinars, and she certainly has a really robust background in education and supporting families. So because of that, I would like to ask you, Yoli, and first question about the engagement of school boards. So I know that there's a pretty diverse following of GLR, and that we have a lot of folks serving in different capacities. So first about school boards, and then to switch you over, put on your other hat for your family work. So both Chancellor Banks and Nick talked about major shifts in curriculum. From your perspective, and at least what I've sort of seen, is that the school board really needs to be informed and aware of these major, shifts, changing in science and theory. And what, from your perspective, how can school boards really support this effort? I think is a first question for you.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. And it's been so great to hear from all of the speakers, the Hunter family, Nick, the Chancellor, Banks, just such a robust conversation. So so pleased and honored to be part of it. So I sat on the school board in LA. The Commissioner, Chancellor Banks and I can debate whose district is the largest, because LA says it is, but New York's is. But we have a significant and very large student population in LA, and a significant number of English learners. And I know we're going to talk about that in a minute. But the role of the board, at least, in my time as a school board member now, just about 13 years ago, and continues to be in most school districts across the country, include hiring and firing the superintendent, approving the annual budget, setting policy, and ensuring accountability. And it's in that setting policy, which includes approving and adopting district curriculum, instructional materials, assessments, and PD efforts that make the role of a school board member especially important as a partner to the superintendent. When I joined the school board, I had already met the wonderful Ralph Smith, so I was already paying attention to this issue of third grade reading proficiency. And I made it my job as a school board member to consistently ask the questions about curriculum, instruction, PD assessments, and really pushed on how poorly we were doing in educating our children. Fast forward that many years, LA is now one of only 5 districts in the entire state of California that has embraced the science of reading. Maybe it started with my pushing, but I know for sure in LA that it also took the leadership and vision of the current superintendent and the previous superintendent. But I want to actually move to share an example, a bright spot of how a board member has had incredible impact in one of those other 5 districts in California around the science of reading. It's a very quick story about my colleague, Todd Collins. He serves on the Palo Alto School Board. Palo Alto is in Northern California. It's mostly an affluent district. And he shared that just prior to the pandemic, he realized that his school district actually had no idea how to educate Latino students, in particular low-income Latino students. He acknowledged that after having them in his district for 4 years, they had failed in teaching them the most essential skill, which is reading. 80% were reading below grade level. As he says, he became super obsessed with the problem and decided to see actually how Palo Alto compared to other districts across the state. For Latino students, Palo Alto, who otherwise had been recognized as the best school district in California, was in the bottom 3% of all districts for low-income Latino students. Todd shared this information with his superintendent, shared all of the research he had done on the science of reading, on structured literacy, what other states were doing, the impact they were having, how the curriculum they had been faithfully using for years was essentially robbing children of their right to read. He offered him data, research, and science to support his position. Todd then asked the superintendent to see this problem as an opportunity to reverse a wrong and serve as a model for the rest of the state. That superintendent was quite compelled, similar to the chancellor we just heard from, and asked the entire board to really study this issue, understand it, to set aggressive goals, to adopt a new curriculum, instructional materials, assessments, PD, et cetera, et cetera. That was in 2021. So this is quite recent. Since then, the results have been quite impressive. They exceeded their goals in year 1 and were named the most improved district in California, moving from the bottom 3rd in the state for low-income Latino students to 25th in the state. In year 2, they ranked at the top 5% for low-income Latino children. A key factor here, and this speaks to the chancellor's own leadership, is having that, putting that stake in the ground and persistent and consistent vocal leadership from both the board and the superintendent. This is the power that a school board member has and a committed superintendent has. The last story I'll share on this issue in terms of the role of the board is the importance of listening to families and students as you do your work as a school board member. And the story that has stayed with me for that many years, over 13 years when I was on the school board, is a community organizer asking me to come and meet with 7 boys, now teenagers, all of whom had dropped out of 7th grade. And so he wanted me to just come and have a conversation with these boys. So I went to their community and was having a conversation, trying to understand why they would leave school, why they would drop out at such a young age. And one young boy said to me, "Miss, do you know what it feels like when you can't read? The shame, the sitting in the back of the classroom, the being laughed at, the not knowing if I was going to be called next, and so skipping out of school." And we have done this unintentionally. And I completely agree with the chancellor that we have given teachers the wrong playbook. This is an opportunity for so many stakeholders, whether you're a superintendent, a school board member, a parent, a mayor, anyone who cares about this, to present yourself and be part of the solution. Bring your leadership to the table, because it doesn't require any one of us, it requires all of us. So hopefully that shaped a little bit of the part of the conversation about the role of a school board member.
Absolutely. And I think that that is so helpful, because one of the things that we hear in Atlanta and some of the work that we do is school board members, even just from a financial perspective, wanting to understand why we would be, maybe 3 years ago, we invested in $6 million worth of leveled readers and leveled literacy intervention. And now we're asking, wait, we need to do something different. So even just hearing you speak about being an educated school board member on the issues that are facing our students in order to best support. Well, I have another question for you. And I know that we're our time is quickly getting away from us. But as Chancellor Banks discussed, and we heard about the importance of family engagement from the Hunter family, how do we get families engaged? How do we have families feeling welcomed, I guess is a better way to ask, especially the families that you are mentioning that may not always feel welcome. And schools are extension of the community, or should be. So the doors should just be flung wide open to families. So how can we do a better job at that?
Well, first and foremost, it requires a complete mind shift to how we even think about families. My experience in whatever position I have been in is that our tendency is to blame families in any system, actually. And yet families are the most powerful part of the solution. And we know that because every parent loves their child more than any one of us can love their child. And we fail at leveraging that love to bring families in. We don't welcome them. We don't give them information that's helpful. And if we give it to them, and I have seen this so many times with non-English speaking monolingual families, not just Spanish, but many others, we still give them all information in English, send documents home in English. That sends a signal that we don't respect families, that we don't want them to partner with them, that they don't care about their children. And so it starts with having a very intentional mind shift. And it starts like what our commissioner in New York is doing, with a deep fundamental belief that families are the most powerful solution to this problem on all levels. But we have to be intentional. We also have to recognize the biases that we bring, intentional or unintentional, implicit or explicit bias around race and poverty and other. And until we do that hard work, I'm not so sure we will do the work well in terms of bringing families in as equal partners.
Yeah, I mean, again, such good information. I think you mentioning that we fail to leverage the love that families have for their students, for their kids, is so powerful. I'm also just want to plug Project Ready. I think it's out of a university in North Carolina, but it is a system, a framework for cultural humility. And essentially what that framework does is just has you reflecting and asking questions of yourself so that you can better learn about the families that you serve. And it's a really good framework because, as you mentioned, we all bring our biases to the table, and that influences how we're able to engage families.
Yeah, the one recommendation for those listening that may have a role to play here around family engagement is to really dig deep about the kind of family engagement that now many are offering. We learned from COVID the power of families. And so the moment, as Dr. Karen Mapp has shared, has finally met us in terms of family engagement as it relates to education. But be very careful that it's not what I call vanilla family engagement. That it's really about creating courageous conversations, which is what we do at Families in Schools, to create the safe space for us to really dig into those assumptions, those stereotypes, without blame, without any of that, but really so that we can do our work better on behalf of children.
Thank you, Yoli. Another good nugget from you about vanilla. What did you call it? Vanilla family engagement?
Vanilla family engagement.
Okay.
My term.
Yes. Well, thank you, Yoli. And again, please stick around because we're going to be coming back for some group discussion in just a few minutes. So now for our last panelist, I'm looking. Okay, Vince, welcome. And Vince, can you tell me again how to say your last name?
Staley.
Okay, Staley. So I'm a speech language pathologist, and that's very important that I'm able to pronounce your last name in the way that it's said. So welcome. So we are getting ready to really try to, I'm glad that you are our final, last but not least, panelist to talk about some of what you do, your role in media, but want to start with asking you a question about somewhat about this film, but just the general role, the importance that the media can play, because we've heard from the chancellor, we've heard from Yoli, we've heard from the Hunter family. They've all raised awareness as a central issue, challenge. So can you talk with us a little bit about the media's role?
Sure. So I'm executive director of Media Impact Funders. We're an association of national association of mostly foundation funders of media in the public interest. So documentary film is a very big part of that. Journalism, strategic communications, and narrative change work, public media, all sorts of things. But documentary film is a particularly powerful tool at telling the hardest stories, the complicated stories, going deep on complex issues, and also sharing the moving personal emotional challenges and the triumphs of these stories. And so documentaries can be incredibly powerful allies in the work. And it's so great for me to be able to just learn from all of you in today's discussion. I'll try to be brief, but and I'll also provide some links about our organization and resources, both knowledge and financial resources that people can tap into. But it's so important to have the personal family stories and the pedagogy and all of the layers of knowledge that you can wrap together in a moving story through a powerful documentary film like we have here. But it's also important to know that, like, one well-told story alone doesn't do it. It's not like some, an inconvenient truth. There it was. Now we know. Now we have an end to global climate change. It takes more than one powerful story. And you're very fortunate in this area of work, because there have been a handful of people like Ralph Smith and Joy Moore who've been sort of beating the drum on media and communications and especially documentary film. And I can recall going to a grade letter reading symposium where we heard another powerful film. It was Roger Weisberg's Broken Places film, which built on a deep treasure trove of interviews that he had for 30 years and shared those, learning stories too. So there are many others. There was a great film by Todd Lending called All the Difference, which actually Joy and her son Wes Moore, Governor Moore, were producers on that film, another film. So if you think about it, there are these films and there are impact strategies, and there are several of them. And if you think about them all together, they can help move the field forward.
Vince, I really am glad that I wrote down what you said about a moving story, and that one story essentially is not enough. And so while the Hunter family is extremely compelling, that we need to hear from more families. I have a question, and this is not a question that I thought about when we previously met. So just,
sure,
answer it however you feel. But it seems like, and we have had a collection of documentaries on this topic, and I'm glad you're saying what you're saying, because I think in the field we've said, okay, well, there was already a film on that. Like, why are we still redoing that? But what you're saying is that the more,
it's a cumulative impact. It's not like you've learned if you've ever gone out and bought a product, you know that it takes you 30, 40 times for the toothpaste ad to get you to buy that toothpaste. You need repetition and different stories, and you need constant reinforcement to learn and deepen that message.
That's great. So I have another question too.
Sure.
About so we've talked about access in different ways. So Chancellor Banks talked about access to the written code. Nick talked about access to teacher training. In terms of storytelling, how can our families who have had generational lack of access get access to being able to tell their stories through documentaries? And maybe that's sort of an off question.
Yeah, I mean,
but
probably it is a community dialogue, and there are media makers in every community. So there are documentarians in your community. You can go to your local community broadcast outlets. Sometimes they're public and educational channels in your community. So there are ways of telling your story through a new documentary, but also there are powerful documentaries available, and you can tap into them to help you tell your story because there's already hundreds of documentaries already out there, and we can help you to identify those things too. But basically, there are a lot of different impact strategies, and I just want to say one important thing is you may have a film that has the kind of story that needs to be told on Netflix to reach thousands and tens of thousands of people, but you may also have an audience of one. The chancellor of the New York City schools might be your audience, and so a filmmaker and a film story, it may be that the audience is very targeted. I'll just give one quick example. There was a film about the terrible tragedy of rape in the military. It was called Invisible War, and their target audience was basically 8 people: the Secretary of Defense and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and they managed to get a screening for those people, and within days there were policy changes that were revealed that needed to be made because of the film that told that story. So film can be a very powerful tool. It could be a tool for millions, or it could be a tool for the number of people who's sitting around a boardroom table.
So we really are going to hold you to, because I've seen some links in some comments in the chat about sharing links. We are really going to hold you to that, because I mentioned this as an example to you when we met for our planning call, that here in Atlanta, in Metro Atlanta in Georgia, we had been seeing for quite some time, maybe about a year, 18 months ago, that parents were really outraged at this notion of critical race theory. And so certainly not to debate where you fall on that, but that was what I've heard Ralph Smith Smith talk about as creating informed demand, and that families were getting this media coverage. They were able to tell their story. And so you turn on the local news in the evening and families are there crying out for what they believe needs to happen in their school system. And so we need that sort of informed demand in the grade level reading communities around the country.
For sure. Well, you've got a good tool right here with this film and many more. Thank you for letting me share my
Yes,
thoughts.
no, thank you. So we look forward to receiving your links. Well, don't go off camera because we're going to invite all of our panelists back. I know we only have 10 minutes left, and I hope that this conversation has been rich for all of our listeners and those who have tuned in, the Hunter family, as well as Chancellor Banks, if you could join us back. I think it might be best, and Sarah and Joy, y'all just let me know what you think, but I'm thinking that it might be best in our last 10 minutes to sort of go round robin and allow all of our panelists to sort of share their call to action. They did that in many ways, but maybe in a more direct way, to hear a call to action for our listeners. And then if we have time to address some of these questions in the chat. So Sarah, I don't know if you want to weigh in on that.
That sounds great to me, Ryan.
Okay, perfect. So let's, who should we start with? How about we start with you, Yoli, with your closing thoughts and call to action?
Well, a couple of things, Ryan. We didn't get to talk about English learners. And so I just want to put a pin and elevate that for our students who are in our educational system, coming in not knowing English, still mastering their own language while they're learning English, that we have to be super intentional of how we use the science of reading and be very sure that we recognize in that process that ELs, English learners, will need additional supports, that they will need beyond comprehensive literacy instruction that native English speakers need. So we have to be very intentional about those supports, include a high emphasis on oral language development with more practice time developing their native language as well as knowledge building. And related to that, we had talked about phonics earlier. With the science of reading's high emphasis on phonics, which is right on, we just need to be very careful about not overdoing it, but instead doing it better. And really aligned to the research around English language learners. So for me, it's a both and, it's not an either or. But sometimes we tend to get into difficult conversations that may pit one against the other. And in this case, it is absolutely a both and. So just a quick reminder on that. And then just my closing thought, I wouldn't be faithful to my 8 years being at the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, but I didn't say that as we transform literacy instruction in our classrooms, we have to keep thinking about chronic absenteeism, about early school success, and about summer learning, because those also contribute to whether our kids will reach grade level reading proficiency and be successful readers. We have a huge problem nationally on chronic absenteeism after COVID. We've got to get a handle on that, because if our kids are not in the classroom where good instruction is happening, then our kids are not going to benefit from it. So.
Thank you, Yoli. And I'm so glad that you mentioned and took a few minutes there to talk about English language learners. It's critically important because we at the Rollins Center for Language and Literacy, our mission, our vision is literacy and justice for all. And we really do mean all. And so in that spirit can certainly transition to Chancellor Banks for any final and closing thoughts. And I might also ask you a question, Chancellor Banks, that there was for you about dyslexia, but I'll let you give some closing thoughts first.
Yeah, well, I totally agree with Yoli. Listen, it's got to be a this and that. Our educational system and the public narrative that has played out has become expert at pitting one against the other. And that plays out in a host of different ways. And the answer is not in choosing one side or the other, but in figuring out how you meld the good stuff all across the board. I believe in that. I don't believe in a system of winners and losers. I truly believe in my heart that every child can win. But they're counting on us as adults to get it right and to figure this out and to come together. But I will tell you that for me, this film, I think, is one of the most important films. We're going to be hosting this film for all the New York City educators as we come back into the beginning of the next school year. I think it's an extremely important film. And I think the story that it tells frames everything that we're trying to do here in New York. It's clear, it's concise, it's cogent, and it lays out what we need to be doing differently. And so that's what we are committed to doing. I really believe in the promise and the potential of all students like young Ivy. And I see her energy and I see her brilliance. Everyone doesn't see that. And I think we've got to recognize that as well. But I do. And I can't speak for what's going to happen all around the country as people are engaged in all kinds of dialogue. But I know what we're getting ready to do here in New York. And I was with a group of educators, superintendents recently, when I told them we were getting ready to announce this. And they said, we need you to be bold in New York, because when you're bold in New York, it gives the rest of us permission to move boldly. And so we're going to step very boldly into this space. I'm tired of all the educational rhetoric. All children can learn, high expectations. After a while, those terms begin to kind of lose their real impact. I want to ensure that every child can read and is on a track to success because they can read. They're going to become better math students and science and everything else because we gave them that basic, solid core foundation, which ultimately allowed them to begin to love reading. You can't love reading if you don't know how to read. I think it was said in the film as well. So we're all in and certainly looking to be part of a community that's really leaning into this space as well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Chancellor Banks. And I think what I'll do is, Sarah, I'm going to leave that question because Chancellor Banks, the question was about how is New York City DOE identifying specifically dyslexia? And that's a more technical question. So if it's okay, we'll get whoever asked that, we'll try to get a follow-up response from the Chancellor and put that out. So we have 3 more minutes left, y'all. Would love to hear final closing thoughts. Let's go. Vince, Nick, and then the Hunter family. We'll let Ivy have the final word here today.
Okay, I'm doing most of my talking in the links, and I'm just offering the pointers to great films. So let me leave it at that. I've done enough talking. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Okay, Nick.
Yep. So I would quickly offer my call to action as sort of a warning, but a positive warning, to never underestimate the impact or overestimate the knowledge of any stakeholder. So from an impact standpoint, from the high school volunteer who has 30 minutes to come in and do some reading and some discussing and some writing with a first grader, that 30 minutes that they meet with that high schooler can be make or break, right? And on the other end, overestimating knowledge. In Marietta, we trained our superintendent all the way down to PE paraprofessionals on the science of reading and structured literacy to be sure that we are all speaking the same language around literacy, so that every time that a student and a parent hear us mentioning a practice or a protocol or a skill, that it's universal across the entire city.
Thank you so much, Nick. So certainly a role for everybody to play in the communities around the country. The Hunter family, what is your call to action for us?
Okay, so I wrote down a couple of things. First is the parents. I wrote down to learn to read with your children, right? Don't be afraid to read with them, even if you haven't read in a long time or you don't know the first thing about reading. Just start introducing them to the letter sounds. Just start introducing them to little books, like little board books with not that many words in it, right? And that's all I started doing with Ivy because we homeschool. So I started doing that with her, and I'm learning just as well as she learning, and it's fun, making it fun. Don't be afraid to start small. Visit the libraries in your area as well, right? Because the libraries usually have a lot of access, a lot of information for you, and a lot of programs that's going to help you support your child's brain development and brain growth. Don't be afraid to ask questions, right? You got to be an advocate for your child. Ask questions. No question is the wrong question because you want to know what's going on. Get involved in your child's education, okay? And then for community leaders, go where your families are. Meet your families where they are. If they're at an event, go there, right? If you have information for your family, meet them where they are. Because sometimes as a mom or a dad or just a caregiver, we sometimes feel ashamed because nobody came up to us or nobody gave us information, right? And especially information that we need. So meet your families where they are, go where they are, visit them, and pass out the information that you have.
Awesome. I would say, besides her taking all of my answers, I would I would say, when it comes to families asking questions, we keep bringing up that topic, but one thing I learned when I watched the film, when I saw Kareem Weaver, just really pushing for what he felt was best for our future and being unapologetic about it. So when you really have questions and you really want to know something, be unapologetic. About asking and pushing for what's best for our children and our future. One thing I would definitely say is as far as resources, Teresa's great at sharing the resources in Virginia Beach. So if you know of resources that people can benefit from, share them, share the resources. Just like, and also Mr. Staley mentioned how one story is not enough. So if you know of a story, share that story, share the story, even if you think, oh, well, they already seen that, so they may not want to share it again, so share stories, share your resources, be unapologetic. And one other thing that we talked about before, how Teresa mentioned community leaders going to where the families are, but not only being there, but also breaking it down in a way that they understand how it affects them. Because sometimes we've been in rooms before with community leaders, and they're talking about like how it may affect one level, but sometimes parents don't quite understand, okay, you guys are talking about this, but how does this translate to me and my child? So just make sure that things can be in layman's terms and understood by families, so that way they feel they can be engaged, so that's it.
Well, thank you, Hunter family. Before we close out, we just need to hear one final word from Ivy. Ivy, what do you want people to do? What do you think we should all do after watching that film? Get ice cream. All right. Well,
y'all heard it. After this webinar wraps up, you've got to go get ice cream.
Yeah.
Ivy said so. Thank you. Oh my goodness. I've been doing this for 4 years. I've never been at such a loss for words. Thank you so much to Chancellor Banks, to Yoli, to Nick, to Vince, to Ryan, and our amazing Hunter family, Teresa, Isaiah, and Ivy. Amazing conversation. I could have stayed on for another hour and a half. I know that Ryan and Chancellor Banks had to go, but I'm here for as long as y'all would keep me. Thank you to all of you who listened in. I hope you will continue to join us for more GLR Week sessions. We've got a double header tomorrow, 12:30 and 2 p.m. Eastern time, and 2 more on Thursday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern and 3 p.m. Eastern. Please continue to join us, and thank you so much again. Amazing.
Enjoy your ice cream, everyone.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Bye, Ivy.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Very fun.
Play date.